Well, it doesn't feel like, in some ways, 2 years since I was last here. But actually, my memory is getting a bit rubbish. I don't know, yes, there are one or two of you of my age and older, and it does get worse, doesn't it? This thing about how long ago was that? I think it was last year or maybe the year before, and actually when you start working it out, it's really 5 years. Remembering can be tough, but we do remember things that really kind of hit us in some way. And I've chatted to my husband, who is going to be 90 in February, and he can remember as a boy World War II. He can remember what was going on. He can remember being really excited when a bomb stopped him being able to go to school. There was an unexploded bomb in the road on the way, no school, yippee. He can also remember the day that the co-op had bananas. And the sweets that his brother-in-law, because his sister's a lot older than him, and he had been out in Burma, and when he came back, he brought with him Turkish Delight and sugared almonds. And Norman has ever since been looking for Turkish Delight that tasted like that came back after the war. I strongly suspect that part of the reason he can't find it, he said, oh, it's closed, it's not quite, part of it is what happens with memory. Something that was really wonderful gets even more wonderful as we keep remembering it. And even when we get something rather like it, it may not be quite, just doesn't feel the same. And it's this business about feeling in memory that's important. And we're rapidly getting to a point where there are no longer people who can remember in that feeling way of it happened to me, what those wars were like. It's the late Queen's grandfather, George V, who, so I suppose it's King Charles's great-grandfather, George V, who inaugurated Armistice Day, not this Remembrance Sunday, but Armistice Day at Buckingham Palace with the French president. And that was the year after the First War. That was supposed to be the war to end all wars. That was the one where poppies became a symbol. The poem that we use a line or two from in Flanders Fields, when we say we will remember them, came out of looking at those muddied fields, the place of so much slaughter and destruction and waste, coming to life again as poppy seeds that had been in the soil for, maybe some of them, for many years, because they were churned up, sprouted into life, and the fields became red, a reminder of the blood spilled there. If you read the rest of that poem, it's not the way we would think about war and those who have suffered in it, and particularly those who have fought and died, quite. Because it talks about them as though they somehow get stuck in that sort of marching into the sunset. And it puts a sort of guilt thing on the people who have survived. But it does speak some important truth, doesn't it, in that we will remember them. Remembering is really important. On Remembrance Sunday, we are remembering in the context of our Christian faith here. Jesus' teaching and life example, and that challenges us when we are tempted to glorify war and the use of force. Christians have been tempted into that place often enough. The Crusades, which took people from this country out to the Middle East to fight the infidel, are a blot on Christianity. And those who have no faith, and indeed those who oppose the things of faith, would say, like John Lennon's song, Imagine, that somehow if we could get rid of war, if we get rid of religion, but particularly often it's thought of the Christian faith, if we could get rid of all of that, it would all be all right. After all, people are basically good, aren't they? And if you could just get rid of all this religious stuff that makes people passionate about stuff, it would be better. Well, I don't suppose you'd be here if you thought that. And I'm glad to say that there are not too many people who think that way. Christians across the country are remembering this day, on this day, the fallen of 2 world wars, yes, but also many others, those who've died in the Falklands and Afghanistan, and yes, those who continue to die in war. We do this in the context of our relationship with a God whose memory never fades even when ours do, and whose memory is not distorted by time and emotion, and in whose Son we have a view of what humanity can and should be. The context of faith is important. We're remembering not to glorify war itself, praising people's dreadful actions, those things that are not godly, romanticizing horrors to make them more manageable. No. But nor are we, as some do, disrespecting good, brave people who took up, of their own choice or because they were compelled by the circumstances they found themselves in, took up arms to perform necessary action for a common good. This is our constant dilemma, that life is not as simple as good this side, black, white, whichever you like, but the opposites, good and evil, do not appear clearly in one dressing or the other. The devil does not appear with horns and a tail. So what are we to do as we remember? We owe a great debt to those who suffered and struggled to keep an evil from taking over. Hitler's hate, particularly for the Jewish people, but also for anybody who didn't, in his limited view, measure up. Those who didn't look right, those who were born with limitations in one way or another, they needed to be wiped out. And that hatred is the opposite of the love of God that embraces absolutely everybody and everything. Humanity so easily falls into that thing which says, providing I do this set of stuff, I'll be okay. And it's more important that I'm okay than that anybody else is. We can even use religion in that way. But that is not our task as we remember. Because when we remember who we are, as children, each of us, a child beloved of a loving Heavenly Father, some of those things that can easily creep in, our jealousies, our fears, are wiped out. Because love, as well as being, as Jesus quoted, the fulfilling of the law, is also the answer to absolutely everything. And when the God whose nature is love comes amongst us in the person of Jesus and tells us what it is to be truly blessed, as we heard in our reading, we have to pay attention, because it does turn world values on their heads. Time changes human perspective. Memories fade, can be distorted. So it's important to work at truth. Not saying unkind things to people who aren't ready to hear them, but looking for the deep down reality of what makes for health, our own and those around. So much of our modern wisdom, if you read, you watch YouTube, and all these people blogging away about how one can be happy and healthy and so on. So much of that is actually very ancient wisdom that's being repackaged, if you like. And very often, the one thing that's taken out of it is why. Why is this? Is it about me? Is it just about how well I can be? Or is it how important it is that I am well because I am part of something much bigger? It is my duty and my joy, as one of our church formulae says, in all times and in all places, to give thanks to the one from whom everything comes. The story of what happens, history, is usually recorded by winners. But in war, who are the winners? There are many, many losers. When the Allies won the war, there were lots of bad things done in the making of peace, as well as many good things. And the present war that we're watching in the Middle East comes out of an end of the war and finding a home for all those displaced Jewish people. Returning them to their homeland was done pretty unkindly to those who were living there at the time. And if you think there's an easy answer to what's going on in the Middle East, you have not understood that long, long history. People are remembering things that went on before they were born, and not for good. So remembering is not good on its own, but it is important that we may find truth. And the only place we will find truth is in Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. And yes, the places that should be the holders of that truth can go way off beam. There's a story I've told a few times. I'm sorry if you've heard it lots of times and find it boring, but it's one of those little parables. It's not a Jesus one at all. But it's a story of the senior devil walking along with his junior, whom he is mentoring. And in the distance, they see a man. His man, I'm sorry, ladies, the story is about a man, who stoops to pick up something from the ground. And the junior devil says, "What's he got? What's he got?" And the senior devil says, "Oh, he's got a piece of the truth." And the junior devil says, "Quick, quick, let's go and get it off him." The senior devil says, "Oh no, let him keep it. Just let him think he's got it all." And that's the truth, isn't it? Our minds are finite. We have capacity to hold great truths and do great things, but we're never going to do it all and be it all. And if we try to have it all, we will, of course, fail. That first Armistice Day, no one was thinking about animals and pacifists. The red poppies were just there, reminding of the bloody fields of Flanders. We still use those poppies, but people have started to put white ones in, remembering the people who were horribly treated because they weren't able or they chose not to take up arms. You know, white feathers being pushed under people's doors and hidden in their lunch boxes, and people being reviled for holding genuine and honest views and acting on them. And there are purple poppies for all the animals, particularly in the First War, thousands and thousands of horses taken from their farm homes, taken across to France, and then after having given everything, the ones that had survived were sent for slaughter because it was too much trouble to bring them home. The war horse story is a lovely story, but there weren't many that survived in that way. So we see things differently now from the time when they were first remembered. And I want to offer you a couple of mnemonics. First, mnemonics, or are they acrostics? I'm not quite sure what the proper word is for these things, but first question, how many petals does a poppy have? Well, you've got some in front of you. That's the one. It has four petals on the poppy. These, the remembrance poppies, are a good representation of the way a poppy looks because the petals overlap. So you do actually see kind of two bits. So these aren't lies, but they're not the whole truth. And I'm offering you some letters from the word poppy. P-O-P-P-Y. Passionately offering peace prayers yearly. If you cut out, you can actually make a poppy out of those if you're an arty type. If you make yourself the right length of stalk and use it to make the black middle, and so on. Passionately offering peace prayers yearly. We do not know what it's like to live in a time of that sort of war where everybody is fighting. And of course, there were some people who were relatively unaffected. Those who lived in country areas had far more to eat than those who were in the towns. But it affected everybody. And that first war, if you think about how many people, those names we read, how many people died. War is a terrible thing. And yet, there are times when it is the better of two great evils. We are living in strange times. Times when the horror of the death camps is actually denied by some. There are those who would say those things did not happen. How they can believe that, I find hard, but it's there. We are living in times when truth is a victim. And it is for those who know the way, the truth, and the life to hold fast to that which is good. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who mourn. Not because it's a happy thing to have to make peace, not because it's a happy thing to need to fight for good, not because it's a happy thing when there is something that you have lost, but because dealing with those things rightly, dealing with evil by hungering and thirsting for it to be conquered and overcome, making peace in places where it's so easy to agree with the conflict. And yes, mourning when things are bad and lost and wrong. These are our tasks as fully human beings. Love wants the good of the other, gives without counting the cost to achieve that good, seeks the common good, not its own, at the expense of others. It is the essence of real life, the answer to all the ills of our world. So let us remember to good purpose, forgiveness and reconciliation, and work for them. When we share in the memories of others, it can help us to deal with what we have to live with now. That war went on for years. Some of the children who are with us today would have, in that time, known nothing else. There were young adults whose lives were totally changed. And when we worry about COVID having changed the lives of our young people, we do right to do so, but we forget that the world has never been a particularly safe place. And our task is to be there for one another, to be countercultural at a time when everybody is being encouraged to be selfish, to vote for things that are going to give them more of whatever it is that they need or think they need. And where caring for those who cannot look after themselves is not important. That is not what it is to be a Christian. And that is where we need to act. To remember, yes, what's gone wrong in the past, and yes, those who have fought and lost their lives for it. But we also have a task of hope. It was what brought people through those terrible times, and it is what takes people through the terrible times of now. We've just sung lots of hopeful stuff that says Jesus is in charge and God is going to make it all right. So let's make sure we can still sing those songs when it doesn't feel like God is doing just that, because God will.